Hello and welcome as we continue our journey through these mini Bible studies toward the fourth Sunday of Easter, April the 25th, 2021. Today we'll be looking at the Psalm for today and for Sunday and sharing some of the reflections I've gathered for this Psalm. And it's a very popular song. Psalm. Oh, wow. I'm having trouble with my lips today, apparently. That many people know, even if you don't go to church, many people know it. It's a Psalm 23. So let me read that for you and then share some of the reflections that I've gathered for today. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. The Lord makes me lie down in green pastures and leads me beside still waters. You restore my soul, O Lord, and guide me along right pathways for your name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup is running over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Many of us in this age group have memorized that first verse of the 23rd Psalm from the King James Version. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. When we hear or read a different translation, our inner nature wants to object. No, that's not the way it goes. Even people who would not be considered religious, in that they really don't attend worship anywhere, and probably haven't for many years if they ever did. A lot of those people still know that there is something, a Bible verse or a prayer or something that starts out, the Lord is my shepherd. That simple phrase, the Lord is my shepherd, is like the proverbial umbrella for every other blessing that follows in today's psalm. Yahweh satisfies every need. Psalm 23 delivers some of the most beautiful and deeply comforting images in the whole Bible. Yet, we cannot rest solely on the sentimental aspect of our feelings toward this psalm. One of the reasons this psalm is so comforting is because it has radical claims that confront our experiences of suffering and fear, of death and alienation. It is a favorite to be read at funerals and memorials. Even as I said, for people who do not attend worship services anywhere. The Christian church has done much to identify Jesus as the shepherd in Psalm 23. And it has done much to develop Jesus as the good shepherd that we look to satisfy every need. In fact, it would be very difficult for Christians to not think about Jesus when reading this psalm. And with that in mind, along with this final verse that goodness and mercy and the dwelling of the house of the Lord forever also provide us with a kind of a happily ever after ending that we favor. We like stories that end happily ever after. Despite the happily ever after final verse, the verses between 1 and 6 do not describe the easy life. And honestly, don't we all long for an easy life? Lying down in green pastures. Oh, that sounds wonderful. Except, most of us really don't relish the reality of solitude and quiet. For example, we have had a long year of solitude because of this pandemic, and many have been anxious to get back into doing. Sometimes we do not appreciate the ways in which the Lord makes me lie down. We would much prefer a vacation, except we would spend all of that time doing something, and then how often do we come back from a vacation needing a rest? Even so, there's no definition to the amount of time that we lie down before we're being led along right pathways for God's name's sake. Frankly, our inclination toward independence makes us want to choose our own pathways. Sometimes they are right pathways, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes we choose the wrong pathways, get ourselves in trouble, and we cry out to God to rescue us. When we remember Jesus and how he said the two greatest commandments were to love God with everything in us and to love others as we love ourselves, then we must understand that developing loving relationships are to be the right pathways that God is talking about here. And verse 4 certainly does not sound cheerful. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Who wants to walk through a valley of a shadow of death? We might conjure up an image of a dark alley or some other scary place while standing at the entrance of this dark alley saying, I will not be afraid, I will not be afraid, I will not be afraid. And honestly, the reality is we are afraid. And we feel like anybody with common sense would be. Verse 4 tells us that the reason the author will fear no evil is because of the presence of the shepherd, whose rod and staff bring comfort. In this context, the rod is what the shepherd uses to beat off predators. And the staff has that hook on the end that rescues the sheep when they fall down into a ravine. So the words remind us that we are going to face hard times. And comfort comes only when we trust the shepherd. Verse 5 also sounds a little paradoxical. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. If we had our choice, we would rather sit down at the table in the presence of our friends and loved ones. Yet, Jesus has challenged us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. So, in what reality do we imagine ourselves sitting down to share a meal with our enemies? Yet, we also need to take notice that the promise of blessing comes after we sit with our enemies. The second half of verse 5 reads, You anoint my head with oil, and my cup is running over. These thoughts remind me of an old wedding joke where a pastor asks the bride if she will take her husband for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, And she responds, yes, no, no, yes. We want to have a relationship with Jesus, the Good Shepherd, yet we also want to write our own terms for the relationship. Going back to that happily ever after ending, well, that may not be all that we thought it means either. We picture our happily ever after ending as that mansion in the sky where we get to live a life of leisure and pleasure. Well, one day I hope that comes true. Yet, the idea in the Hebrew word in this psalm that is translated as dwell would more accurately be translated as return to. So the idea is more about returning to God's house again and again. So this journey that's being made in the 23rd Psalm does not end at the end of the psalm. It's not the end of the story. Rather, seeking after God's presence is a lifelong enterprise, a long-term journey, returning again and again to God's house. We generally are comforted by the psalm being read at a funeral or a memorial service because it helps us picture our deceased loved one on the journey into heaven after they die. And I'm not saying that there is something wrong with that. That brings us comfort and it's a good thing at the time. I'm saying that that should not be our only use for and understanding of this psalm. And it certainly should not be our only use for and our understanding of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. As followers of Jesus, we need to understand Jesus as so much more than just our guide into heaven. Jesus is a trailblazer. He trailblazed the pathways of righteousness. Jesus does tend to our needs, and he guides us into right relationships with each other and with God. In the psalm, the pathways of righteousness do not lead directly from the green pasture to the house of the Lord. In between, there will be peaks and valleys along the way. And many of those valleys are going to feel like shadows of death. Jesus also reminds us that sometimes the pathways of righteousness in this life lead to the cross. Still, the good news of Psalm 23 is that when we walk these pathways of righteousness, we walk with God. Thank you for joining me today as we look at an old favorite psalm, maybe in a new light. We plan and prepare for our fourth Sunday of Easter, April the 25th, 2021. I hope you're having a great day. Take care, and God bless.